again, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Monkey and My Tree. In today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about the different languages that you might come across while researching your family tree. So many of us, especially in America, we have ancestry that goes back to several different locations, and those languages often speak several different languages. Quite often, our ancestors either just dropped that language in favor of English over the course of time, or their descendants chose not to speak the language and chose to speak English, or whatever the case may be. And so by the time you get down to where you're at, you're an American that speaks English, but you may not speak the language that some of your ancestors spoke. In my particular case, many of my ancestors were English, and they came to America way back in the colonial days, like the Mayflower kind of stuff, way back then. But some of my ancestors were not English. I have German ancestry, as one example, and then another one that's a little bit more that I'm going to actually give as an example today is my Czech ancestry. One of my great-grandparents is a Czech descendant. She was born in America, but her parents' parents were actually born in, I guess it's called the Czech Republic nowadays. But at the time that they came to this country, it was still the Kingdom of Bohemia. But that's a topic for another episode. But they spoke Czech when they came here, and their names were Czech names. And so sometimes trying to research my family history with them, it's not just a matter of whether or not records from over there are available here online on the internet or whatever. It has more to do with trying to figure out, with no knowledge of the Czech language whatsoever, what the proper spelling of their names was. So the example I'm going to give you, and this is why I decided to go ahead and not so much learning Czech, the whole language at this moment, but I did go and look up some YouTube videos to get an idea of pronunciation, at least figure out pronunciation, at least to be able to read what it's supposed to sound like anyway. It's a very difficult language to speak from English to Czech, in my opinion. More than anything, it helped me with the pronunciation, which came in handy. My second great-grandfather, his last name was Stichka. That's how it's pronounced in my family today. And it was spelled Stichka. Stichka. As an English speaker, it makes perfect sense. It sounds just like it's spelled as an English speaker. But I ran in, and not knowing anything really about the Czech language when I first started, I started trying to do research, trying to figure out more about that lineage, but I would end up kind of at a roadblock by the beginning of the 20th century. And it took me a while to clue into the fact that maybe it wasn't spelled that way always, because they weren't English, so it's possible that it was spelled differently. And one of the things that clued me into that was his wife's maiden name was Kochi, which is spelled K-O-C-I. Of course, it's not actually a C, but I'll get into that in a moment. So I said, okay, well, how am I going to figure out alternate spellings for this name? The only way I could really get a good grasp in my mind, I mean, there's different, depending on any online sources to search for records that you might be using, they sometimes will have built-in alternate spellings into their search programming, to put it in layman's terms. But if you don't really understand what you're looking for, then you don't know if what you're looking at is a possible match or just a random collection of letters that could look similar. So I needed to get an understanding of how words are spelled in Czech. I may not be able to speak Czech ever, but I need to know how to be able to see how the name Stichka would have been spelled and pronounced in Czech. Would it have been a completely different word? Would it have been spelled differently? Whatever. So I got on the internet, YouTube, and that sort of thing, to look up the alphabet in Czech and pronunciation. So here's what I ended up discovering. So it turns out that there's a letter in the Czech language that is a C. but the C has this little, it looks like a bit like an upside down V, and it's called a hat check. By making a C into the C with the hat check above it, you're effectively making that C make the ch sound. So like in English, CH makes the ch sound. Well, in Czech, if you have a C with this hat check above it, it makes the ch sound. So I said, I wonder if stička is actually pronounced with S-T-I-C with the hat check, K-A. And then I looked it up on the different search engines that I've been using to look for records, and sure enough, a lot more, or just by putting in sticka, S-T-I-C-K-A, leaving out that H, I was actually finding that there were a lot more people with the name Stička, in this case, than I'd realized, because while in my family the spelling of the name got changed, in many other branches in the Americas it didn't. So I was like, oh, this is more common of a name than I realized. And then to kind of double check, I actually went over to the Google, or the Czech version of Google, because I thought, okay, let's see if there's anybody on the Czech version of Google that has this name. So I put the name with the hat check above the C in the search engine and click search. And you know what? I didn't find any Stičkas spelled that way. But you know what I did find? I found Stička. The hat check over the S makes the S in Czech a little bit like a sh, the SH in English. So somehow, over the course of history, after coming to this country, probably with the accent that my ancestor probably spoke with, the sh sound at the beginning got dropped. So you didn't end up with S-H-T-I-C-H-K-A. It just was Stička. And when I saw that, then all of a sudden there's all kinds of people over there with the name Stička. So it turns out that my ancestor's name wasn't Stička, it was Stička. And that's actually grown to be relatively easy to pronounce as far as Czech words go. I mean, you should see the word for four and then go and hear it. Go ahead and look that up on YouTube. Yeah, I'm not even going to be able to count in Czech. But hey, at least now I know the proper spelling of my ancestor's name. So I haven't been able to go and find additional records on my ancestors, so it hasn't helped me that far, but I've got the proper spelling. When you're first starting to trace your ancestry for these ancestors that spoke different languages, came from countries that spoke different languages, and the records are in different languages, it's going to be pretty helpful to at least get a little bit of those other languages under your belt. You don't necessarily have to be a fluent speaker in the language, but just starting out with pronunciation is going to help you get a lot farther along. And it'll also be helpful to learn the months, days, and years. So when you come across, say, a gravestone of one of your Czech ancestors, and it has their birth and death on it, you know what it says. I mean, the numbers you might be able to read, but the month might be a little bit more difficult. And then, of course, if there's an inscription on the tombstone, you'll be able to know what that says too, because if everything else isn't checked, the inscription probably is too. So it's just one more nugget of information that you'll have for your research. And then not only that, once you get to going to those other countries, if you're ever so lucky, I haven't been that lucky yet, but if you're so lucky to get to go and look in the records in those other countries, whatever those records may be, you might actually have an idea of what you're looking at. Or you can at least get by enough to be able to communicate with whoever the librarian is or whatever at the place where the records are. It's kind of almost like you're having to get the prerequisite in a language to really learn about those ancestors. But it's going to really help you understand the history and the circumstances and even just how to say their name. So that's pretty much going to be it for this episode. If you like this episode, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to see more of Monkey in My Tree, go ahead and subscribe. And Monkey in My Tree is now part of my main blog, randomconsiderations.com. And there's another YouTube channel for random considerations where I pretty much everything that's not genealogy that I feel like talking about is what's going to end up over there. I'm going to keep this blog pretty much genealogy related. And we also have a Facebook and a Twitter for both Monkey and My Tree and also for Random Considerations. And all that's going to be linked down below. That concludes this episode. I hope you have a great day and have fun climbing your family tree.